Hi, I'm Dave Mergel with Aquacraft Brand Portfolio and Aquacraft Seafood Innovation. And this is where we talk to thought leaders around the seafood sector and influencers around the world, all with the goal of figuring out how can we reorient our efforts towards the consumer and use brand marketing to power seafood consumption here in North America. And today I'm standing in front of this social media boiler room, which is appropriate for today's conversation because we're going to be talking about social media and digital strategy. Obviously, here in the seafood sector, everyone knows what social media is. Many people are using it: Instagram, LinkedIn, maybe Facebook, maybe even YouTube. But I wonder how many people are really using it strategically and maximizing its impact. Well, today's conversation, we talked to a digital and social strategist, Mark Smiciklas, who helped me form my digital and social strategies about 11 years ago when I was just getting started out developing a salmon brand. And those learnings were really, really useful and impactful in helping us connect with our consumer and our customer and developing a really powerful brand. Today's conversation with Mark Smiciklas was excellent. A lot of great tangible steps that we can take to maximize the use of social media, develop a strategy, and really connect with our consumer and develop a powerful brand. And by the way, this is fake. This is just a green screen. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Mark as much as I did. Hello and welcome today, Mark. This is Mark Smiciklas joining us from right here in Vancouver. Mark is a digital strategist and expert all things social media marketing and digital marketing. And I'm thrilled to have you today, joining us today, Mark.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I met you 10 years ago when we were starting up this new salmon brand. Really at that time, social media was not necessarily in its infancy, but it was 10 years ago. So I assume lots have changed from your perspective in that time period.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the industry has changed. 10 years ago seems such a long time ago as far as I think the impact you can make 10 years ago. It is still very much a long game. But yeah, I think just some of the biggest changes are just around tools, around, things like Facebook have become ad platforms. So, a lot of the changes have really become sort of that pay to play mentality where, it's a lot more challenging now to get organic reach. Whereas 10 years ago, if you had a great blog or if you had a presence on certain channels, I think you had natural traffic. And that's, I think, a little bit more challenging to come by these days, for sure.
10 years ago, you really could have a brand and be forward facing and probably get by without a social media presence. But is it possible to do that today, to be front facing without a social media presence?
I think it's a challenge for brands not to be on social for a couple of different reasons. But strictly from a brand trust point of view, brand legitimacy, a lot of brands are going to be on social strictly for the purpose of being able to communicate with those customers, even at different levels, right? Some brands are not going to necessarily be selling online. It's pretty difficult today to ignore the fact that people generally are online. And even though they may not necessarily buy your product through that digital transaction, they're still probably users of your product or service. Obviously, seafood consumption, as our specific discussion today, a lot of people eat seafood. They may not buy it online, but the point is they are online as individuals, and you have that opportunity to educate people, to connect with them one-on-one using those channels. So I think I think it's a real miss for a lot of brands not to take that opportunity.
I mean, is it more or less not crazy not to be on social media?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's sort of it's a huge missed opportunity. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense for any brand not to be on social, in my opinion.
But I've observed a lot of users, and even if these are, I don't know, we could call them sophisticated, well-known brands, do not seem to have a developed strategy. And I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about what your thoughts are around strategy and how to how to use social media strategically to achieve your objectives.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to understanding who your customer is, really, really knowing them. So, what channels are they on? What kind of questions do they have? What do they need to know about your product or brand? And then it just becomes, the strategic part is creating content, being present online. Part of that strategy as well is putting tools in place to listen for conversations, listen for opportunities to engage with consumers, answering questions, social media, customer service. So that content and understanding your audience piece is really the strategic backbone. And really, I mean, one of the big areas, or if you sort of had to look at it, is the right piece of content to the right person on the right channel at the right time.
It's all about knowing who that person is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, we get caught up. Everybody gets caught up in the tools, right? It's that sort of shiny object syndrome, right? And there's new stuff coming out all the time. We were just in a recent sort of engagement with a client doing a digital audit for them, and TikTok came up. Their customer is not the demographic of TikTok, but it's sort of one of the first things they asked about is TikTok. Should we be on TikTok? And you know what? I mean, I think you have to look at all these channels, and that's where the strategy comes in as well, is to understand, okay, like what are these channels? How do people engage on these channels? What's the general demographic? What's, how can this help, move us forward on our business goals, right? And that's sort of, it really is just, it's marketing strategy. It happens to be digital because of the platforms. You have to factor in, the things that aren't that sexy to talk about, like budget, resource allocation. So you sort of have to go to your, the finance side of your business and figure, okay, this is how much time we have to invest in this. This is how much money we want to start slow, for example. Then you want to pick the absolute best channels, and then, the best content strategies to get the most value, out of your budget, basically. Return on both time and money invested, from an engagement perspective on those channels. But the beauty of channels like this is, if you approach it strategically, I think, the cost and the return, I think, can be quite good for the money and time invested.
And what you kind of diagrammed is almost like, from a marketing perspective, if you sort of had a diagram and this is the person that, I've done lots of research. I clearly know who it is I want to engage with. Great.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could almost draw, circles of the different people who interact with those, that target individual, and then start to get a strategy of, okay, how do those all interact? And it's starting to give me a real feel for, okay, who are the influencers for this person? What's the type of content this individual likes or is attracted to? What are the channels they would typically go on? But am I right? Is that more or less the strategy, or am I completely missing how you would structure?
No, yeah. I mean, that's basically, you typically want to do some kind of audit, right? And that audit would include, part of that is developing who the customer is, do that sort of that strategy piece, understanding what your competitors are doing, right? That rolls into it as well. Because you get a lot of, you don't want to copy what your competitors are doing, but you typically, in the digital audit process, you also get a really good idea of, for example, what kind of content people are engaging with. So that gives you, it's not that you're going to copy that content, but it gives you an understanding of the landscape to say, okay, recipes are doing, people can't get enough recipes. Behind the scenes, seems to be working well for competitor A, B, and C. So you start sort of also at the same time developing, a bit of an idea of content at the same time. You can also assess, through that audit process, budget as well, right? So you can figure out, okay, well, for me to sort of play in this arena, we need to be prepared to publish on this frequency level, and that means we're going to have to create this much content. And then you can start budgeting from there as well, right? So it's sort of, the strategy sort of comes from a lot of different areas. I mean, obviously, when you start publishing and producing content, and you get into the background, before you publish that first post, a couple of months before that, as you're working out the strategy, you're going to basically need to understand who that customer is, how much content we need to create. At least that gives you sort of an idea of, the investment and the time that's going to be required, as opposed to just starting, and I've seen this. I mean, it's one of the interesting things I found over the years, is, social media in particular, I mean, other digital channels, but social media in particular, for some reason doesn't get viewed with the same rigor as other business, other parts of a business. For example, you're not going to be sort of flippant about your finance. You're not going to be, you're going to take some time when it comes to thinking about operations, distribution, production, marketing in general. But for some reason, because of the nature of the tools, and the space is still relatively new. I mean, it's pretty established now, but some brands they really treat their social as sort of a throwaway, they don't apply the same strategic principles that they would to the rest of their business.
For your point about applying resources and the proper investment and attention to social media marketing, I mean, that really in the sector that I exist in, so the seafood sector, I mean, that really is the issue with all of the marketing. This whole idea of marketing to consumers, developing brands, I mean, there really is not this attention paid to the importance of that. So within that, social media, absolutely. I've more or less seen and observed that it's not really strategically driven as much as you just got to be there. Okay, let's put a bunch of great, beautiful dishes every day, and that'll be sufficient. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about content. And I guess the interesting thing, we could take this in a million directions because basically,
it's true.
Let's go to content for a second, because obviously, if you're on social media, you're creating content. So, I mean, I guess my first question that I kind of wonder is, can you create a narrative as a brand on social media? Or is this media so fleeting that it's really just about images and the message of the minute?
Yeah, it is, is somebody going to go back on a Facebook post from like 2 months ago and look at it again? Probably not. Twitter's even more so. It is very in the moment. However, you can still build a brand story. Essentially, I mean, it's not in real time, but essentially it sort of is like in real time. And part of that content strategy is understanding, where we would start is just understanding, once you understand who your customer is, what are all the possible information needs that they would have around your business and products, right? But I think you sort of look at it as buckets, right? So if you have a company, there might be 4 or 5 categories to tell a sort of holistic brand story. A company is more than its products, right? Clearly, it's its people. So are there people stories you can tell behind the scenes, right? Who are the people working on the line? Who are the delivery drivers? Who are, who's the CEO? Who's the people that work in the office? Why do they love the product? I mean, there's so many things, so many avenues you can go down the people side. And then you can sort of, you sort of the people side, you have the company side. So you can do a little bit of stuff around, company news. Then you have products. There's a whole bunch of stuff around products. And And then you can also do, I mean, you could do sort of a more of a campaign stream as well, where you're just talking about promotions. So you sort of divide that into categories, and then you sort of publish to those categories on a regular basis. Consistency is huge, right? Today, it's about repetition in a sense, right? You got to continue to sort of tell that story in an interesting way, and be there for people when they ask questions, and you see opportunities to interact with people.
I mean, and unless you're living in a cave, you probably have a lot of interesting stuff to tell people about your business, about the people that work in your business, about your customers, about what's happening in your plant one day, what's happening here, what's happening there. The issue here is not really, so we've got some tangible steps here. Okay. So understand who you are, understand who you want to engage with, who you're engaging with, figure out what are those messages that are resonating and that you want to communicate to this person. Figure out some of those sort of influencers, all sorts of things that influence how you could interact with that person. Okay, so you're starting to get a really good idea of what your strategy might be. Content, there's tons of content. And again, it should be able to support your brand assets. But now I'm starting to think, holy cow, who is going to be creating all this content?
Yes, that is a very good question. And that is typically where sort of the rubber meets the road, so to speak. I mean, and this is what you would do. Part of the strategy is also developing, okay, this is how we want to start. This is how much we want to publish. This is how much content we need to create. This is going to take 5 hours a week, 6 hours a week, if we did it ourselves. Do you have the resources internally? Do you have the skill set internally to at least do part of that? And what's interesting is you have a lot of, every business has experts on their team, right? So seafood is no different. So you're going to have, whether it's that QA manager or you're going to have that person in the plant, your sales team, they have a lot of knowledge, right? So how can you tap into that knowledge? So what that might be something like, you might do an interview series. You might do, so it's extracting the knowledge that you have built into your organization, getting that out. And then, typically interviews might be the best way to do that. And then you can take that interview, you can turn that into a blog post, you can turn that into graphics, right? So always look inside your organization first at the expertise that you have. The number one thing, and this can't be underestimated, and this is where we've seen programs fall down. You have to have a champion within the organization. You need one person that is available, even if they're not going to actually physically create the content themselves, right? You need one person that's physically available to interact with those freelancers and that outside agency. And let's talk about the seafood space. Farmers, we've got people out there on the farm. There's this great imagery, lots of interesting things to do, and we'll just get them to create the content. Mm-hmm. And after about 2 weeks, you realize I'm not getting any photos anymore. Yeah. So I really kind of think you almost have to pay. I actually think this might be the most important part, having to pay someone not to generate content, like fake content, but actually to go out there. Maybe you need to hire somebody to go capture photography or videography or whatever it might be. Yep. Yeah. Like one of the things we've done recently, and that it speaks exactly to what you're talking about. So let's say you had a salmon farm, or you say you had any brand. Basically what you could do to start with is figure out how much content you need, right? So based on your publishing frequency, you're going to need every 3 months, you're going to need 30, let's say for argument's sake, 30 pieces of content. So what you do, a lot of it is going to be visual, right? So a lot of it's going to be either photographs or, social media graphics, right? Where those could be partially illustrated, partially include photos. But we've done this. You hire a photographer, for like a 2-day, it's a project basically. You hire a photographer, 2-day shoot, you set everything up. They go out, whether it's on site or whether it's in the studio shooting products, or whether, they basically will take the imagery needed for those 30 to 40 pieces of content. And then you sort of hand that over to a graphic designer who can then, and that photographer as well, for example, can shoot, they can shoot B-roll, they can shoot little videos, right? 6, 8, 15-second videos. So when they're out there, you capture a bunch of different things, right? All in one sort of session. And then, for the first year, you might do 3 or 4 of those shoots. But you're absolutely right. Like, somebody physically needs to create the content. Everything else is basically bonus, right? So after a while of being online, like what we found, people are going to like your product. They're going to start sharing stuff on Instagram. You can repost that stuff on stories, for example.
But
yeah,
now here's another question. How professional does this content need to look? I mean, as a brand manager, you want to be in brand character. Ideally, it looks like it completely, perfectly represents the brand. But what's more important, that or consistent content and being able to continue to engage your customers?
You can often get paralyzed by perfection.
Yes.
So if you're looking for the perfect thing, it tends to impact your ability to create content in the first place.
And now, how often should you be posting? I mean, are you supposed to be posting daily?
Yeah, so that really depends too. I mean, that's going to depend on a couple of things. Certain channels sort of have a certain cadence, I guess, but really it comes down to, if you're launching, a lot of it comes down to resources, right? Because it is all the stuff we've talked about. Really, it takes labor to do it all. So it's a matter of, it does, a lot of it is based on budget. So if you have X amount, you can sort of, this is where, a consultant or a digital marketing strategist can help you understand, okay, for this amount of money, this is your best value. So you can, let's say, for argument's sake, post 3 times a week on these 2 channels. That makes sense, right? Or you can do sort of 6 to 8 posts a week. This is how we should spread them out, right?
So you make a post on Instagram. Great. Mm-hmm. But not every post is created equal. Some posts are posted at the right time to engage mm-hmm. more people with the proper use of hashtags. And you hear this hashtag thing all the time.
Yeah.
I would imagine you could have a whole career just being a hashtag expert. So how do you?
I mean, researching hashtags definitely takes a little bit of time. And I mean, if you wanted to, you can, there's going to be certain hashtags in your industry that people are going to sort of gravitate to. But yeah, I mean, there's research involved in that potentially as well, right?
So then how do you optimize the channels? Or is that a whole other can of worms? And how do you select your channels?
Yeah, so I think let's go to the selection first. And that's going to basically be, you want to pick the channels where your customer is. Let's use Facebook as an example. Facebook has gotten older, right? But who is on Facebook? People in their 50s who use it to post on it. And, so you have to sort of figure that out. I mean, that's a real generalization. I mean, you don't want to necessarily take that verbatim, but this is the kind of thing you want to look at. It's like, okay, this is our target customer. They're definitely on, let's say you can decide yourself, they're definitely on Facebook. And Facebook offers a lot of great targeting opportunities. Mm-hmm. So we should be able to find somebody that, loves smoked salmon. So that might be one channel. And then you decide, okay, is Instagram, what's sort of the, who's interacting on Instagram, and also looking at your competitors. Are consumers interacting with our competitors' brands? And if they are, and there's tools out there to sort of help you get this information, then you can say, yeah, you know what? I mean, our top 3 competitors seem to be pretty active and they seem to be getting some engagement on Instagram. That's a pretty good indication that, if we're talking about the same consumer, that's probably a good place to sort of go. One of the things you have to sort of look at is that, I mentioned it at the very beginning, that sort of pay to play. These channels now, depending on what study you look at, organic reach on Facebook is, I would think, somewhere like between 1% and 5%. And again, it's they have a number of different ad different ways to advertise through the Facebook sort of platform. And there's some great targeting options. So yeah, it's a matter of, again, these don't have to be huge budgets, right? I mean, you might spend $15 a post, $20 a post kind of thing, right? We're not talking about thousands of dollars. It's not buying like print ads and things like that. So that's where some of the efficiency comes in. And again, one of the biggest optimizing things is making sure that if you are going to spend $1 on advertising, that you try to put that post in front of the right person. Right? Yeah.
Is there any point in having a social media strategy and activating a social media strategy without allocating some money to go get those eyeballs?
Yeah, no, I think you have to build in some sort of ad budget.
Yeah, that if you had $10 to spend, would you spend it on this sort of ad spend, this sort of Facebook ad spend, or what about sponsoring, or I don't even know if this is possible, but getting a super user?
Ambassador programs.
Okay,
there's some great examples. Yeah, so I mean, looking at, again, you have to be, it's sort of buyer beware around influencers. Influencer marketing still works. If I had to say there was a trend, I would say it's moving more towards sort of micro influencers, where, there's a lot of stuff out there about, what percentage of this influencer's following is actually are bots, for example. What percentage is real? So if you're paying for somebody's following, you're not necessarily paying for engagement, right? Which is what you want to pay for. Right. But there's lots of really passionate creators out there that have smaller followings, but really engaged followings, organic followings. So they might have 10,000 followers on Instagram instead of 1 million. But the people that are following that creator are really into what they produce.
So don't go and allocate $30,000 to get Kanye to post on Instagram. If you got $20,000, probably split it up a bunch of different ways. One
Absolutely.
of them might be identifying 5 key influencers that are just authentic.
And I'm going to use the seafood category as an example. Like, I did a little bit of research into just a few brands. And you're right. Even some of the big brands are not doing a lot of stuff, right? So to get to the level that you need to get to sort of make an impact is attainable, I think, for a lot of brands. Certain categories, and seafood is one of them, I think, where I think there's huge opportunities for brands to do something interesting and do something cool with content to tell their story, and be able to sort of play with the big boys, if you had to sort of say it that way.
It is an interesting point. I mean, it is really almost the great equalizer.
It is. Yeah.
At the end of the day, the only difference between Coca-Cola with unlimited budgets and Dave's Seafood Company is really the ability to spend crazy money on acquisition. But anybody with the tools available to them now can create great content and be smart and strategic and know who their customer is, understand what message you're trying to communicate. They can post for free. So really, like you say, do not be deterred by the technical complications behind it, because there's tons of resources and experts like yourself who know how to make this really successful. And the one thing that we should recognize here, and this whole video series has really been about that, is look, you've got to know your consumer, you've got to know your customer, you've got to start interacting with that person, you've got to start telling your story and engaging with them, and then use all the things a good marketer would use to do that. And probably the most important is embracing social media and digital marketing strategies today. Certainly, at the very least, the pandemic has taught us that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are huge opportunities for sure, and it's just like, I would be deterred starting a salmon farm. I would have the first idea about what to do to make that happen. It's just like somebody that owns a salmon farm might not have the idea about how to get on social, right? I mean, there's resources out there. There's lots of great stuff for free to get educated, to start, to see if it makes sense, right? To understand some of the potential. You can do all that research in advance for free. It doesn't cost you anything to get educated about, the potential of some of these. You can research what competitors are doing, and then once you sort of embrace that idea, again, don't be deterred.
Well, Mark, this has been a great conversation, and it's a topic I think that everybody who's making a commitment to marketing their brand and connecting with their customer has to make and has to understand, and they have to allocate resources towards it. But it can be daunting, and it's really daunting. And I think this conversation with you has really simplified it in a lot of useful, tangible ways, things that are practical. And I think it also gave people, hopefully, some things to think about on resource allocation, commitment to this strategy, and just how to bring it to life. So I really want to thank you for your time today. You obviously enormously helped me in the creation of my brand 10 years ago. I can still see you're still on the cutting edge of this topic. Thank you again, Mark Smiciklas, digital and social media strategist and expert.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Thanks, Mark.
All right.